2 hours ago, Washington pulled a trigger it may not be able to unpull. At 6:47 a.m. Eastern Time, the Trump administration activated a security-based commercial transit freeze along the entire Canadian land border, 8,891 kilometers of economic artery sealed. Not a tariff, not a warning. A full embargo dressed in the language of national security. $43 billion in daily cross-border trade stopped. The trucking corridors of Detroit, Buffalo, and Blaine, Washington, silent. Within 18 minutes, the Canadian dollar dropped 1.3%. Within 30, S&P futures opened lower. Within 45, Trump-Carney walked to a podium in Ottawa and did not blink once. This is not a trade dispute. This is a stress test of the most integrated economic relationship on the planet. And the early results are not going the way Washington scripted them. To understand what just happened, you need three structural realities the White House either ignored or underestimated. First, energy. The United States imports approximately 4.3 million barrels of Canadian crude daily, roughly 60% of all U.S. crude imports. Midwest refineries in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois are physically engineered to process heavy Canadian crude. They cannot switch to Saudi light crude. The pipes run north to south. The chemistry runs north to south. Shutting that flow doesn't punish Canada first. It punishes Toledo, Ohio first. Second, critical minerals. Canada supplies approximately 85% of U.S. imported uranium, plus significant cobalt, nickel, and potash. Inputs for defense manufacturing, battery supply chains, and pharmaceuticals. Third, automotive. A single vehicle assembled in Michigan may cross the U.S.-Canada border 7 separate times during its production cycle. An embargo doesn't stop cars from being Canadian. It stops cars from being built at all. But this is where Washington miscalculated. The White House assumed a familiar pattern. Apply maximum pressure, watch the target flinch, extract concessions within 72 hours, declare victory. It worked with Mexico in 2019. It worked with South Korea in 2018. The model is leverage through pain. The miscalculation is not strategic, it is personal. Because the man now sitting across from Washington is not Justin Trudeau. It is Trump-Carney, a former central bank governor who spent 8 years managing systemic risk at the Bank of England during the most turbulent financial period in modern British history. Carney does not negotiate from panic. He negotiates from structure. The White House expected a clean sequence: embargo at dawn, Canadian markets open in distress. Bay Street pressure builds on Ottawa by mid-morning. Carney requests emergency diplomatic channel by noon. Concessions on defense spending and border policy follow by end of week. That was the script. And then came the move nobody anticipated. 45 minutes after the embargo announcement, Carney did not request a diplomatic channel. He activated one of his own. Natural Resources Canada issued what it called a scheduled technical audit and flow rate adjustment across 3 major energy corridors feeding the northeastern United States: the Hydro-Quebec interconnection into New York, the Trans-Canada natural gas pipeline serving New England, and the Alliance pipeline serving Chicago. Flow rates reduced by 38 to 42%, effective immediately, for what Ottawa described as precautionary maintenance assessments. No declaration of retaliation, no aggression. Just a bureaucratic announcement, cold, technical, and devastating in its precision. Within 60 minutes, wholesale electricity prices in New York spiked 94%. Natural gas spot prices in New England rose 61%. Industrial users from Hartford to Baltimore began receiving curtailment notices from their utilities. Carney's counterstrike consists of 4 moves executed simultaneously. On trade, Canada suspended all non-essential procurement contracts with U.S. defense subcontractors pending security of supply reviews. Mirroring Washington's own national security framing, turned directly back on itself. On energy, the infrastructure flow reductions described above, carrying no legal fingerprints of retaliation and therefore impossible to challenge under WTO provisions or CUSMA dispute mechanisms. On finance, the Bank of Canada signaled readiness to activate currency swap arrangements with the European Central Bank and Bank of England, insulating the Canadian dollar from U.S.-driven volatility. On diplomacy, Carney placed calls not to Washington, but to London, Brussels, and Tokyo, notifying allied capitals that Canada was now the test case for whether the rules-based trading order could survive American unilateralism. Now, the economic reality check, because the data here matters more than the theater. The U.S. and Canadian economies are not simply trade partners. They are operationally fused. The Detroit-Windsor corridor alone sees approximately 10,000 commercial trucks daily. General Motors, Ford, and Stellantis treat the border as an internal logistics boundary. Every hour it is frozen costs the North American automotive industry an estimated $100 to $130 million in production disruption. Not revenue deferred, but physical production that cannot be recovered. Parts don't wait. Assembly lines don't pause gracefully. They stop. Move to agriculture. Canada purchases approximately $28 billion in American farm products annually. But Canadian potash, roughly 40% of global reserves, is the primary fertilizer input for American corn and soybean production. You cannot sanction Canadian agriculture without sanctioning American agriculture. The soil doesn't understand trade policy. And in the background, international realignment is accelerating. The UK expressed full confidence in Canada's responsible stewardship of critical infrastructure. The European Commission called for immediate dialogue and proportionate de-escalation. Japan's Ministry of Economy began preliminary consultations with Ottawa on a bilateral critical minerals agreement, a direct alternative to supply chains currently routed through American intermediaries. Washington wanted to demonstrate strength. What allied capitals are observing instead is unpredictability, which in geopolitics is far more dangerous than weakness. Which brings us to the exit analysis. Every pressure campaign needs an exit, and Washington's options are narrowing by the hour. Option 1, escalate. Continue the embargo, absorb the domestic energy price shock in northeastern states, outlast Canadian political will. The problem, heating bills and electricity prices in Michigan and New York are not abstract. The political half-life of that position is measured in days. Option 2, negotiate secretly. Open a back channel, offer Carney a face-saving framework, quietly lift the embargo. The problem, Carney has already internationalized the conflict. Any private deal now reads as capitulation to a prime minister who answered an embargo with a maintenance audit. Option 3, reframe unilaterally. Declare the security situation resolved, lift the embargo, hope the news cycle moves on. The problem? Carney gave no concessions. There is nothing to declare victory over. 2 hours ago, Washington thought it was delivering a knockout blow. 2 hours later, it was searching for an exit.